Have a listen to this. Have a listen to this.
Now, that kind of talk this week dragged Australia's share market to a two-year low. There are, of course, complex reasons for that.
He was the big spender. The big spender.
Doing the grocery shopping could take a huge chunk out of the family budget.
And that's finance.
G'day and welcome to Comedian versus Economist. We demystify the world of money and help you get a handle on the bigger picture. My name is Adam and I'm joined as always by my older brother and real-life economist, Thomas. Welcome, Thomas.
Oh, thanks, Adam. Good to be here again.
Yeah, episode 9, Thomas.
Yeah, power number.
To think Dad said we would never amount to anything.
Yeah, look at us now.
Look at us now, Dad. Oh, listen at least. Episode 9 though, and the final episode in our intro series. 10 would have been a nice number, I can't help thinking, but here we are, in true economist style.
Yeah, we'll round up. It's 10.
Economists don't round, do they? That seems very uneconomist-like.
Oh, no, we don't get bogged down in the digits.
True, we're talking macroeconomics here, aren't we? We're not, we can round down to the nearest billion.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So our episode last week on MMT, if you haven't heard it, do yourself a favour, go back and listen to that one. Got people pretty fired up, Thomas, would you believe? I had no idea that people cared so much about MMT, or modern monetary theory, as it were. In fact, one of our listeners was so worked up that he decided to write an opinion piece in the Australian Financial Review, which is fine. We like email, but the AFR is good as well. But it came out almost the same time that we dropped the last episode. Don't forget, you can always email us, cve@equitymates.com, or via the website equitymates.com/CVE. But
if you are going to drop an article in the Australian Financial Review, at least hashtag the show,
hashtag CVE. Yep. Wolfgang didn't do that, but I want to give you a few quotes from the article, okay? And you tell me if he's not talking about you.
Yeah, let's recap. So, modern monetary theory. What the reason why we're talking about it is it's like money printing, money printing to finance government deficits. So, money printing for governments to spend lots of money on whatever they want. MMT is a theory that describes what happens and why that's not as scary as we've been led to believe. In a nutshell, go check out the last episode for a fuller wrap.
Yeah, because you're an MMT fanboy, aren't you? You're on Team MMT.
Fanboy.
Rah, 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 go MMT.
Yeah, got my shirt.
It's a short chant if you went like, give me an M. It's only 3 letters. You'd be done in no time.
Yeah. It's one of the things I like about it. I don't know that I'm a fanboy, but I do think the GFC experience and the quantitative easing era, the money printing that followed the GFC, did create a lot of anomalies that orthodox economics has not been able to explain. And I think in the quest for an explanation about what actually happened and what is happening right now, I think MMT is doing the best job. I think they're ahead.
Well, Wolfgang from the AFR would beg to differ. And you're in his sights. So he said, a spectre is haunting the world, Thomas.
Ooh.
Modern monetary theory in spectre form is haunting the world. And he called it an example of how populist evangelists can gain quick popularity through blogs, tweets, and talk fests, but avoiding serious professional scrutiny through established journals and critical book reviews. He's talking about you, isn't he?
I think we can read between the lines here.
All he missed out was Dear Thomas.
Yeah.
A generation of inexperienced fringe dwellers in finance and academia began to advocate MMT. That's you.
Yeah.
Fringe-dwelling, yeah. Finance and academia. You live in Mullumbimby.
Yeah, I'm as fringe as it gets.
Yeah. He said the age-old wisdom that more money chasing an inevitably slow-growing supply of goods and services leads to painful inflation that cannot be brushed aside easily. Age-old wisdom, Thomas.
Age-old wisdom. That's it.
Is there something in that? Is that the key?
Yeah. Old age. Something old age people believe. I think. No, like he's laying out the orthodox economic position. So this is still he's an emeritus professor at UNSW, I think it is, and
right.
What he's talking about is the standard line that's being taught in economics departments in universities across the country, and it's that money printing creates inflation, painful inflation at that.
Painful, yeah. Well, we talked about that last week, and my understanding, if you'll indulge me for a moment, my understanding was that inflation's not going to happen is as long as whatever we're printing the money for is not constrained. So as long as if there's enough things to buy with the money that we're printing, then inflation won't happen, and we can all just keep just fire up the printing machines and march our way into the future.
Yeah, that's essentially that's one of the insights of MMT, or one of the nuances that MMT tries to add. And I think it's worth remembering that MMT isn't a radical reconfiguring. It's not of economics. It's not like we're moving from a heliocentric universe to an Earth-centric universe, or one way to the other. So
what?
Sorry. So it was like
something about a helicopter. I feel what's helicopter got to do with this? What are we talking about?
No, like people used to believe that the Earth was the center of the universe. Then we started believing that the sun was the center of the universe, and that's a radically different, worldview of how things work.
Yeah,
MMT, I don't think it gets painted as being incredibly radical, but it doesn't. It's not throwing out any of the old insights from orthodox economics. I think what it's trying to do is add nuance to the picture. And so MMT wouldn't say that money printing doesn't cause inflation. I think it would say it can, but it might not. And it depends on the context that money printing happens in, whether you get inflation or not, or where you get inflation. So it's sort of adding that nuance to the picture. And that nuance is really needed because after the GFC, we saw the quantitative easing era in the US, massive money printing, and it didn't create consumer price inflation. Arguably, it created asset price inflation. The US stock market tripled over the decade following the GFC. So there was inflation in some sectors of the economy, but not in others, not in consumer price consumer prices, which is where you normally expect it to show up. And so we need to be able to explain that. And because there wasn't inflation, because we didn't see inflation, we've got what we've got now, which is governments and central banks saying, like, we're in a massive crisis. We printed a crap can of money last time. Why don't we just do the same thing again? And that's what we've got.
Yeah, and so we talked about that last week, and we don't want to cover over too much of the ground that we covered off then, but we're saying now that people we should be letting it run at least. It's a reality. It's not necessarily that we should be letting it do anything. It's just a kind of reality that we're in, and the printing money is not seemingly having a negative effect. So we don't need to jump on it right away and start paying back the debt. And I guess this feeds into what we want to talk about today. We and I say this with some trepidation. Today we want to talk about political economics, right? Or the political economy. And Wolfgang in the AFR, what was his last name? I forget. Casper. Wolfgang, thank you. Wolfgang Casper would no doubt be classed as a conservative. And is this a typical kind of conservative view, or how do the different sort of sides of politics approach this?
Yeah, I think this is where it's really interesting. So I think what you're seeing here is a view that's starting to, it would sort of seem to be a coordinated response to what's happening, and the traction that MMT is getting. And I think, and the Conservatives are running arguments against MMT, trying to discredit MMT. But I think the arguments are fairly weak. and you see here, so Casper's pointing to inflation, but like it ignores this. The elephant in the room is that we've had a decade of money printing and it hasn't created inflation. So like, why not? That's the puzzle that we need to explain. But it's the puzzle that conservative commentators just seem to ignore.
When did we have inflation? When was inflation at its worst?
Back in the 70s, probably.
Oh, yeah?
I don't think There's different types of inflation. Economists think about different types of inflation. There's what they call demand pull inflation, which is when there's so much money and so much demand and heat in the economy that starts bidding the prices up of everything in the economy. You also have what's called supply push inflation, which is when the cost of inputs go up and that pushes price levels up. And we saw that with the OPEC crisis when OPEC got together and decided to push up oil prices, that a huge spike in oil prices flowed through that was an input into everything in the economy. And so as that input cost increased, that increased everything in the price level in the economy.
Right.
So that was the last major intense period of inflation, was back in the 70s, really.
Yeah, cool. All right, sorry. So back to the conservatives' approach to MMT.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting about MMT, I think, is that, so it is true that MMT, I don't know what you call them, proponents or theorists or whatever.
Fanboys.
Fanboys, yeah.
Or girls. Stephanie Kelton. She was mentioned in the article as
she's probably one of the leading proponents, or the economic advisor to Bernie Sanders' campaign.
Right.
It is true that they are the fringe, that it's not widely accepted, the MMT view, yet. It's still very much a fringe sort of idea. Even sort of along conservative or progressive lines, MMT sort of exists even on the outer of all of that, and it's a very small cohort.
Spoken about in whispers in speakeasies around campuses. So when you get to uni, you can join the frisbee club or
there's a secret
or
handshake.
The MMT society.
Yeah, but I mean, it was such a central tenet of orthodox economics for so long that money printing causes inflation. That anyone who said that wasn't true was sort of just laughed out of the room, and in a practical sense, didn't get tenure, didn't get a position in the economics department. Right. And so they've sort of there's very few names that you can point to driving this, and Stephanie Kelton's an exception to that. But the reason she's able to, kind of as Wolfgang Casper's complaining about, is that she didn't do it through normal channels. She didn't do it through economic departments and published journals. She did it through blogs and talk fests and podcasts, probably.
Does that make it invalid then? I mean, we're looking at we're in COVID times, and we're looking at vaccines, and there's lots of conspiracy theories flying around about Bill Gates is going to inject us with tracking devices and things. So you want something that's peer reviewed, don't you? You want some backing for your claims or for your theories.
Yeah,
it's not enough to just go on a talk fest like this, or or
start your own podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Who are you anyway?
Look, ideally you do. But again, this comes back to the
ideally. Oh, it's nice. Sure, it's nice to have independent peer review. That's a nice to have. We put that in the in the MMT club. We put that as a nice to have.
But it's like, again, it comes back to this Popperian revolution idea in science.
Popperian, stop.
Yeah,
what?
Karl Popper. I talked about this last week, that science doesn't advance in gradual incremental steps. It advances in revolutions.
You did talk about that. Yes.
So economics departments select people who already agree with what they believe and so on. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. You don't want economic departments jumping all over the political spectrum one week to the next. A certain stability is probably ideal. But I think MMT has been around enough, and it's pointing to this saying, like, it's a massive elephant in the room. You've got massive money printing that didn't create consumer price inflation, and we're running the same story now. We're running the same story now without orthodox economics being able to explain what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of this, or what the journey is going to be, because we're off the charts. The story ends with there should be at some point consumer price inflation, but it does appear that it's much more nuanced than that, and that's where MMT, I think, is adding value. What's interesting about MMT proponents is that politically, they all seem to be clustered around the very progressive end of the spectrum. That, so Bernie Sanders, for example, that's, he's, practically a radical. And that seems to be where MMT proponents are the ones that get coverage. That's where their politics aligns, that they're progressive by nature.
Right. I've got something to ask you about that, but before we do, I just want to take a quick break here. We'll take a pause, grab a quick word from our sponsors, and then we're going to come back and talk more political economics. See you soon. Welcome back to Comedian versus Economist. We're talking MMT, and more specifically, or less specifically maybe, we're talking political economics. And Thomas, you were actually a political economics tutor, weren't you, at one point?
Yeah, political economy. That's the sort of like the branch of economics that deals with the intersection of how the economy works, economic theory, and politics, how it gets dealt with in the real world.
Let's not show off.
Okay.
So you were, before the break, you were talking conservatives and their view of MMT. But the Liberal Party in Australia, at least, they've overseen some huge spending, some huge money printing, particularly in the COVID response. And in my mind, they've always been the Conservative Party. So what's driving that? Are they expecting that they're still like Josh Zoidberg is still like, we're going to pay it back, we're going to get it back in the black? Or are they like, they don't have a plan yet?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a ridiculous situation. Like, we're talking about $1 trillion deficit, that, we've gone from a debt and deficits disaster to being totally cool with the $1 trillion deficit. So it's a very unusual situation. The Liberal Party does seem to be clinging to the need for austerity and for running disciplined budgets, even though they're not right now, and everyone's cool with that. So yeah, it's a very unusual time. And I think, like, it's worth thinking about why progressives have been drawn to MMT, because progressives typically want to run good social programs. They want public housing, they want free dental, they want environmental protections, support, these sort of things. And typically the political resistance to those things is conservatives saying, look, we're all about that. It's a great idea, but it's a bit tight this year. Yeah. We just don't have the money for that.
Yeah, there's no cash. There's no cash here.
Yeah, no cash kept on premises. Big sign on Parliament House that says that.
I really hope there is. There must be, and I really hope there is.
Yeah, and so progressives who want to drive a progressive agenda have been drawn to MMT because MMT offers a way to fund these things. Conservatives typically, and we're talking about not just like current era conservatives, but like for generations, have been opposed to government spending. And sort of the driving idea out of the US is something called starve the beast. That the less you spend on government provision of services, the smaller government is. And you want to keep the government small. You don't want it growing too big. You don't want it growing into a beast, because once it becomes a beast, then it becomes difficult to control and you end up with totalitarianism.
Right.
So the full government control of everything, communism or whatever you want to call that. And so sort of the doctrine of starve the beast is like, well, let's keep government spending constrained to avoid it starting to infringe on civil liberties. That's sort of the conservative
I don't know that providing
position.
homes for people without homes as infringing too much on civil liberties, though, is it? Like, I mean, in terms of starving the beast, I think we could feed the beast a little bit. maybe find a little bit of room in the beast for some hospitals and welfare programs. I don't know.
Yeah. You're such a.
I mean, I understand we don't want the government controlling everything and looking after us, but maybe spread a little bit around.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's like I personally find it a little bit of a difficult position to really defend wholeheartedly. Like I think it is. I mean, I guess I'm probably more of a social democrat. I like the idea of the provision of essential public services. I think that's good. I don't think the market does a particularly great job of providing essential services all the time. So I think there's definitely some role for that. I'm not into totalitarian communism, but
we've not tried it.
Yeah, well,
we could give it a go.
Give it a go. Why not? We're just trying everything. So
yeah, that's right. I mean, you go, well, what do we know about inflation and money printing? Turns out we didn't know a whole lot about it. If this all works out, mind you, this is not like this is still got a long way to run. Something tells me, but I'm not advocating communism here.
You're just dog whistling to the communists in the audience. But I think so. It's interesting. Like it's interesting because MMT itself is essentially value neutral. Like it's saying that monetary sovereign governments can print money, can finance their own deficits, and can have money to spend on stuff that they want to spend. What they then go and spend with that's a political question, and it doesn't have to be progressive stuff. It could just as easily be spent on building a wall between, New South Wales and Queensland as it could on, universal healthcare or something like that. Like it doesn't, just because the money's there doesn't mean that it needs to go into progressive causes. So it's interesting that the Conservatives are pushing back against it, and I think it must be because it's this sort of starve the beast argument that they don't want government provision of everything. And that's sort of what happens if there is an unlimited budget. And this isn't what MMT's proponents are suggesting there is. They're not saying that you can just money print and there's no consequences and you never have to pay the piper. They're not saying that. But if that idea that's a misconception that's starting to take hold, and Conservatives are driving that misconception. But if that conception starts to take hold, the political calculus changes radically, because once the public thinks there's money for everything, then they're going to want money for everything, for everything that they want in life. So it does seem like it is a road to big government. And I think that's why Conservatives are worried about it, and they're pushing back. But right now, and I think Wolfgang Kasper's article is a good example. They're not doing it very effectively, and they're not hitting targets in my mind. They're not mounting a good argument, and they're not addressing the real problem, the evidence that needs to be explained. They're not providing a plausible explanation.
Interesting. Something else that I noticed in the article, and something that keeps popping up, is this word Keynesian. It's Keynesian? Hang on, Keynesian, that's some kind of reflexology, isn't it? Keynesian stimulus. That's when they really dig their knuckle into your heel.
Yeah, a particular point in the instep.
You go get some Keynesian stimulus in there. Is that it?
No, it's Keynesianism.
Keynesianism, right.
It's named after John Maynard Keynes, famous British economist in the 1930s.
Famous British, it's an oxymoron, isn't it? Famous economist.
You don't have too many theories named after you. But basically, so the Great Depression hit, and his response was that the government should just spend money. So they're saying that the problem with the Great Depression was inadequate demand. There wasn't enough demand to keep everyone in full employment and to keep the economy ticking along, and the government should step into the breach. The government should just, dig a hole, bury $100 million and let people dig it up. Just whatever the public demand should fill the gaps created by private demand.
Right.
And sort of from the 30s through to the 60s, 70s, that was the dominant economic idea, that the role of government was to backfill demand whenever private demand collapsed to a certain point, and to create to create unemployment. That the government should step in at that point. But that idea went out of fashion in the 60s and 70s.
Why?
Partly because of the inflationary episodes that followed. A lot of that sort of governments, didn't always do a great job of reading where private demand was at and tended to overspend, and that overspending created inflation. It was arguably one of the causes of the inflation.
So is that where MMT is different then? Is MMTs different because it's controlled spending somehow? It's controlled.
I wouldn't. No, I think they kind of click together in a way. Like, again, it's sort of like MMT doesn't necessarily say what you should spend the money on, even though many proponents have progressive agendas that they would like to see the money spent on. MMT itself just sort of is as the description of how the world works, how the money flows around, what the money gets spent on. So whether it's military spending or whether it's backfilling demand through Keynesian stimulus, that's a political question. That's sort of not really what MMT is trying to answer definitively.
So just to kind of recap here, we're kind of nearing the end of this episode, but so it's still quite a fringe kind of mindset. Mm-hmm. We can't really separate it in terms of the left and the right. You hear that a lot on in the media about the left and the right and what their approaches to, like the Labor Party, for example, aren't proponents of MMT, are they necessarily? But then I guess that's not true left and right. It's sort of leftish and rightish.
Yeah, I mean, the political economy's drifted a long way right over the last 30 or 40 years. So what's considered progressive now, sort of like the high water mark was probably Whitlam and the introduction of free higher education and all of that. That was probably like the high water mark for progressive leftish economic policy. And since then, it's been drifting rightward and quite strongly. And that's taken both the political parties with it. They're both a lot further right of where they used to be.
Yeah, so we're not going to... Yeah, we're not going to hear because if the Liberal parties come out now and they're effectively doing MMT, they've been doing it, they're doing quantitative easing, we're not going to hear the Labor Party come out and say, we're going to scrap it if we get in, like we're going to put the brakes on. Are they, or is that what they're saying?
It's very unlikely, I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, now that there is money for stuff, typically Labor is a fan of more spending relative to the Liberal Party. The Labor Party's come a long way right over the last 20, 30 years as well, but they're not as aggressive as the coalition has been. There's sort of the idea of the right-wing ratchet that sort of Richard Dennis at the Australian Institute talks about, which is that you're trying to, in order to starve the beast, you offer tax cuts when times are good, and then when times get bad, you cut services. And then when times get good again, you offer tax cuts, so that reduces your revenue. And then when times get bad, you spend less by cutting services. And it sort of ratchets down. And that's sort of what's happened over the last 20 or 30 years, that the government sort of got smaller and smaller through cutting taxes and then cutting services spending. Well,
I reckon that does us for this week's episode and the final week of our intro series. So if you haven't heard the first 8 episodes of this series, then be sure to go back and start at the beginning. From here, we're going to change up the format a bit. I think still to be determined exactly what that looks like, Thomas. But we're going to start looking at a bit more current events, some of the data that's coming out as it comes out. Look at some of the jobs data as it's released. Talk about what that means. Look at the growth data, all that kind of stuff. So we hope that the first 9 episodes that we've done here have given you a good grounding in a lot of the basic or the fundamental macroeconomic terms or economic terms and concepts. hopefully this is something that as we go on and when we get to episode 450 and people are tuning in all over the world for the very first time, we can say, go back and listen to episode 1 to 9 where we got in trouble with the AFR because we paid out one of their chief writers. I don't know, but we do thank Wolfgang Casper for his response to our episode last week.
Keep listening.
Keep listening. Appreciate you tuning in, Wolfgang. Don't forget you can leave a review on iTunes. That'd be good. But you don't have to write an article in the AFR to contact us. If you want, you can send us an email at cve@equitymates.com. You can find us on the website at equitymates.com/CVE. A big thank you to our buddies over at Equity Mates, Bryce and Alec, for their support and helping us get this intro series done and dusted.
Shout out to Sasha for the production on this first series.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just an amazing job Sasha does. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. We hope you'll join us next week for episode 10, the first one of the rest of them. Until then, take it easy and we'll talk to you soon.
This podcast proudly brought to you by Equity Mates Media. Always remember, all information contained in this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional, financial, legal, or tax advice. The hosts of Equity Mates are not financial professionals and are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. For more information, head to our disclaimer page, where you can find resources to search for a registered financial professional near you.